All right, everyone, go ahead and find your seats and grab your notebooks. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to act as history professors conducting a comprehensive exam review of the C-SPAN 2021 Presidential Historian Rankings. Think of this as our absolute masterclass in executive leadership. We're going to dive into the data, analyze the scores, and figure out exactly what it takes to pass or fail the ultimate test of history. So we have exactly 44 past presidents who have been graded in this extensive survey. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, haven't we had more presidents than that? You're right. But since Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms, he just counts as one individual for the sake of our grading curve today. A panel of 142 historical experts pored over the records of these 44 men to comprehensively evaluate their time in the Oval Office. Here is our syllabus for today's Explainer. We'll review the survey methodology, examine the specific leadership traits tested, look at the top and bottom of the class, and then finish up with some discussion questions. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the C-SPAN survey methodology. It is vital to remember right out of the gate that we are strictly and neutrally reviewing the test scores compiled by these historians. We aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoints here. To use a sports analogy, think of these historians like baseball statisticians calculating an all-time batting average across radically different eras of the game. They are stepping way back from the immediate partisan heat of the moment to evaluate long-term perceived effectiveness and complex political shifts over time, rather than getting bogged down in current political rivalries. Moving right along to Section 2, the leadership characteristics examined. So, what is exactly on the grading rubric? The historians utilized these 10 specific leadership characteristics to evaluate every single administration. As you look at this list, you'll notice it covers a huge range of skills. We've got the highly tangible stuff like economic management and administrative skills, right next to the deeply intangible traits like moral authority and vision. It tells us that a president can't just be a great day-to-day manager. They literally have to be a visionary, a diplomat, and a crisis manager all at the exact same time. And here is the real kicker with this rubric. Every single one of these 10 categories carries an equal weight in determining the final overall ranking of the leader. Each slice of that pie represents exactly 10% of the total grade, meaning you can't just absolutely ace relations with Congress but completely bomb international relations and expect to graduate at the top of the class. It requires a truly holistic mastery of executive leadership to get a good grade here. Now for the really fun stuff. Section 3, the top-ranked presidents. Look at the valedictorians up here on the board. Lincoln, Washington, and FDR consistently take the top 3 spots across multiple iterations of this survey. And the big question is, why? Well, it's largely because they faced massive, existential, national crises. We're talking the Civil War, the very founding of the Republic, the Great Depression, and World War II. They didn't just manage the country during a quiet time, they essentially had to save it or completely define it. To break this down a bit more, the crucial point is that a perfect score in crisis leadership heavily anchors these top-tier standings. Take Lincoln, for example. He achieved an unmatched score in crisis leadership during the American Civil War. Now, the data shows us that his administrative skills were ranked highly, but they weren't actually his absolute strongest suit. We all know managing his cabinet and generals was famously messy at times. But his unmatched ability to steer the ship of state through its greatest existential threat is what propelled him right to number 1. Then there's FDR. What's really fascinating here is how his masterful public persuasion directly enhanced his perceived success in economic management. His famous fireside chats weren't just nice morale boosters, they were powerful economic tools. They spurred periods of strong economic growth by restoring public confidence in the banking system. The historians graded his economic management so highly because his ability to communicate effectively prevented total financial collapse and laid the groundwork for robust recovery. So, to summarize the long-term impact we see in this data, the leaders who permanently established our core national institutions, like Washington, or literally preserved the Union, like Lincoln, are the ones who aced this historical exam. Their high scores reflect massive decisions that continued to shape the country decades or even centuries after they left the classroom. All right, time to flip the page to Section 4, the bottom-ranked presidents. Reporting strictly on the data provided by the C-SPAN survey, Franklin Pierce, Andrew Johnson, and James Buchanan sit at the very bottom of the class. They received incredibly low scores across almost all 10 of those metrics, and you might notice a very distinct 19th century political trend here. All 3 of these men governed immediately before or immediately after the Civil War. Pierce, for instance, failed drastically by signing the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was a catastrophic miscalculation that actively escalated pre-war tensions instead of resolving them. Analyzing the core character traits driving these failing grades, we can see exactly where they missed the mark on the rubric. Buchanan was penalized heavily by historians for his complete inaction and paralysis as the Southern states began to secede. That is an absolute failure in crisis leadership. Conversely, Andrew Johnson, who took over after Lincoln's assassination, fundamentally failed the test on moral authority and pursued equal justice for all during the incredibly volatile period of Reconstruction. And this brings us to a huge takeaway across the entire dataset: public persuasion. We see a clear trend where leaders who fail to build public consensus ultimately suffer in their long-term historical rankings. In the modern era, public opinion polls heavily influence these standings. Today's historians actively use modern polling data as a quantifiable way to measure a president's public persuasion. A president's ability to command strong approval ratings directly correlates with higher marks in setting an agenda, which definitively shapes how modern commanders-in-chief are historically graded over time. Let's wrap up today with Section 5, some final discussion questions for you to take home. Here is your first essay prompt to chew on. Based on the data we just reviewed, is it fundamentally impossible for a president to be ranked in the top 3 without facing a massive existential national crisis? Think deeply about how crises literally shape the ceiling of perceived historical success. If someone serves during a time of absolute peace and quiet prosperity, can they ever score high enough in crisis leadership to beat out a Lincoln or Washington? It's a fascinating paradox. To be remembered as truly great, you might just need terrible circumstances. And finally, as we analyze these specific criteria, consider how evolving public communication might change this very grading rubric in the future. Will a president's mastery of social media or digital persuasion be graded the exact same way as FDR's radio addresses or Lincoln's written speeches? How will modern, rapid-fire communication alter the way historians 50 years from now evaluate public persuasion? Ponder that as you review your notes tonight. Class dismissed.